So without further ado, I'd like to now move on to our opening session where we have an amazing speaker. This opening session will set the scene for the seminar where Eugene will highlight what has been happening in the data analytics landscape and give an indication of what we will see in the future. So, hello. Dr. Duborssarsky is the principal founder of the Australia-New Zealand Data Analytics Network, a community of meetup groups across the region with over 14,600 members. It includes 5,000 plus members, Data Science Sydney Group, among others. He is a data science leader with over 20 years commercial experience, and in business he is the CEO of Prescient, providing elite data science training to hundreds in Australia and overseas over the last 5 years, and now offers courses in quantum computing. It's a long CV. I'm going to keep going because it's amazing the entrepreneurial aspect of, I think, of his bio. He is the chief data scientist of Alpha Zeta, a global analytics consulting spanning 41 countries, with over 460 consultants globally, a founding partner of Advantage Data, a leading Australian analytics consultancy, Aurum Data, a new data valuation and commercialization firm, and Risk Earth, an environmental catastrophe risk modeling company. And if he has any more time left, he is also the principal data science advisor to a growing number of technology startups covering the fields of banking, entertainment, medicine, sports, and insurance. So as you can see, he is perfectly suited to open up our conference and tell you what the landscape out there looks like. So thanks very much, Eugene.
Well, thank you, Elaine, for this opportunity to present, and thank you to the committee of the Data Analytics Working Group. I think the video was a very hard act to follow, but I'll do the best I can. And I had a chat with Bassem about what I should talk about here, and it was a good chat. And I realized that this is going to be a tough one for 35 minutes, but we'll see how we go. So, as Elaine said, I'm going to be talking about data analytics as it is now, and more so as it is in the future. And I'll give you the exact summary. The way it is now is immature, in many ways I would say broken, and nowhere near its full potential. And it's in a transitional state. I'm betting on the future. I don't think this transitional state will last long, and I want to tell you about what this future looks like, what's driving it, and where you folks as actuaries specifically and as data analytics professionals secondly will fit. The other bit of the summary is, if any actuary out there thinks, well, I'm an actuary, but I'd like to figure out what this analytics business is, I've got news for you. You're already in the analytics business. In fact, you're very highly skilled analytics professionals, and I would bet on any of you over a number of people who are quite confidently calling themselves data scientists. You folks are very capable data scientists. So I have a whole lot of good news for actuaries as how I think people with your skill set, people who've gone through the weeding selection processes that you've gone through, people of your caliber, I think, look pretty good in this emerging future. The news for the institution that is kind enough to host this, and professions in general, is less good. And I'll be discussing that too. And finally, at Bassem and Elaine's request, I'll say a few things about, well, what you can do to get more into, or more, I guess, more noticeably into the data analytics field, though I will assure you, you're already in it. You've been in it for a very long time. So, a few things that may sound like motherhood statements. I always like to start with the bleeding obvious and derive from that some non-obvious things, a bit like first-year maths. Huh? We're in a period of rapid technological change. It's one of those TED Talk motherhood statements, isn't it? But it's true. We're talking about a period of rapid technological change, and what's happening with data analytics is obviously a consequence of that, and that's why we're having this conversation. And of course, following this rapid technological change, I should say one more thing about the rapid technological change. It really is ongoing, relentless, inexorable, it just doesn't stop. We're talking about new things, new interesting things happening every week or every month, possibly accelerating. Behind it is rapid social change. And in my notes here, I've got a question mark after the rapid, because where the technological change, I think, just goes on and on and on, the social change is a bit more lumpy. The social change is, well, it's full of what Taleb calls black swans. It's full of big things that happen, and then nothing happens for a while, and then another big thing happens. And in many ways, it's lumpy, it changes unevenly across geographies, across sectors of society, across the economy, and so forth. And that's an important point as well, which will be relevant later. Now, here is another bit, more specific bit of social change relating to the rapid technological change in data analytics and IT and engineering and everything else. And this is best summarized by Eric Ries, who is the creator of a very useful concept called the lean startup. Who's heard of the lean startup? Well, one way Eric Ries explained his motivation for the lean startup approach is that we're getting better and better at doing stuff. And when I say we're getting better and better at doing stuff, I mean everything from we have amazing improvement in how we manage large groups of people. Yes, the technology enables things that weren't enabled before. We have methodological improvements. We have social and economic improvements. It's now easier than ever to do stuff. Like, let's say we have a project in mind. That project will be cheaper than it would have been 20 years ago. It will be much quicker, much cheaper, much more risk-free. We're getting better and better at doing stuff. Things that used to be only accessible to large corporations or maybe even nation states are now accessible to me in my fluffy bunny slippers in my bedroom. For example, starting up the IT infrastructure equivalent to that of a large bank. Any of us can do it with the cloud now. You couldn't do that 15 years ago. The point there is, the non-trivial point, is that it's getting easier and easier to do stuff, but knowing what to do is becoming a more and more important question. So where in the past, what do we call important people in business? We call them executives, right? Why? Because they execute, they do stuff. Well, I would say that when it comes to doing stuff, increasingly our attitude to doing stuff is there's an app for that. And there's an app for that is the 21st century's way of saying, do you want fries with that? Doing is becoming a trivial task, even though it used to be the highest status task, because you could be a town on this side of the river and there's a market on that side of the river, and it's like everybody knows that if only you could build a bridge, things would be great. The trick was building that bridge. It's hard, it's expensive, it's risky, right? So I'm not saying the need to do things has gone away, far from it, but on a relative basis, we're getting better and better at doing stuff. Stuff happens much more quickly, and knowing what to do, what to build, where to invest your resources is getting more and more important. So good decisions are becoming more and more important. So non-trivial expectation one, I actually think that in the future, important people aren't going to be called executives. They'll be called something that has to do with their ability to decide rather than their ability to make things happen. And I see a decoupling between the decision function, which is all about wisdom, and the executive function, which is all about what? Well, it's all about just being conscientious, it's all about getting large groups of people to do stuff. And how do you get large groups of people to do stuff? Well, you either bribe them or you bully them. I don't know that these are super high IQ skills, but as I said, increasingly, as I'll discuss later, it's not even about getting people to do things. It's about getting machines to do things. Very different skill again. So decisions are much more important than ever. And this brings me to this other thing. I am really surprised by all the talk I hear about data. Data this, data that. Occasionally analytics this, analytics that. Data this, data that. But what's interesting is I hardly ever hear the word decision being used. And that's a motherhood statement, but at the coalface, doing consulting gigs or talking to people in the industry or mentoring data scientists who I can tell you, this is another thing, a lot of data scientists have very lucrative careers where they're not very happy at all. Why? Because, well, go and see a video of mine titled Questions to Ask Your Prospective Employer. So I'll just sort of footnote that one. But the long and the short of it is that a lot of data scientists get hired for something other than the only reason you would hire a data scientist, which is to help you make better decisions. You would think that businesses want to make better decisions. You would think that senior executives want to make better decisions. You would think they understand that the only purpose of data and data analytics is to facilitate better decision making. And you'd be surprised to hear that there are other reasons. And in fact, in the anomalous situation we have in the current environment, those other reasons are, well, they constitute a fairly significant chunk of the market, if not predominate. I'll have more to say about other reasons and actuaries as well, because actually, quite legitimately, a lot of actuaries work for other reasons than to facilitate good decision making. More on this later. So the first non-trivial point with all of the rapid technological change points is that good decisions matter. Good decisions are suddenly vitally strategically important in the way they weren't in the past. Rapid and large volume of decisions that have to be right because your competitors are trying to make decisions as well, or your competitors aside, you're in a highly uncertain, highly complex environment where not making a decision is not an option, and making a bad decision has an immediate and very bad outcome. That's increasingly true in a lot of areas, obviously not true everywhere, but I think that's an increasing trend. The other trend is that, well, we have this thing that helps us make better decisions. It's called data analytics. We've been developing, interestingly enough, a technology that makes this all happen. Now, the other big change that's coming is it's not data analytics, but it's to do with technology, and it's automation. We're just automating the heck out of everything, aren't we? And what does that automation mean? Automation means, again, anomalies aside, and I'll discuss the anomalous transitional state later, but after the anomalies have settled, you're left with people doing the things computers can't do, whatever that is. And by the way, that obviously changes over time in the computer's favor, does it not? So what is it that computers can't do? Now, there are a whole lot of esoteric examples, and there's some wonderful debates we can have about this, but my claim is that in the white-collar space, there will be things that computers can't do until computers can do everything, at which point singularity. I'm not saying we won't reach the singularity. So singularity aside, I'm pretty sure that won't happen for a while. Does everyone know what I mean by the singularity? It's when the computers literally take over and start building smarter computers than themselves. You'll laugh. People take this very seriously as possibly one of the biggest risks to humanity. My point is that more trivially and more immediately, and something that's happening now, is there is a change in the nature of work, with human beings doing the things that computers can't do. And when human beings do the things that computers can't do, I would argue, in a white-collar context, everyone is a data analytics professional. Everyone. Because everyone does the synthesis and the search for insights to support good decision-making that computers can't do. Because remember, actually doing stuff, actually executing, that's the stuff that gets automated. And the trivial decision-making, well, that's automated as well. But you know, we're still smarter than computers. We can still do things computers can't. We use computers. Well, that's the white-collar career of the future. Now, what do I have to support this? The most interesting trend for me is what I've been seeing in the government. Now, government is a space in the Western world where you just can't fire people. So you've got the employees you've got. Some of them have been there for a very long time. But what you do is you reassign them. And government, like everybody else, is modernizing and automating and so forth. So I run a fairly lucrative training business, and I can tell you that training government people to become data literate is a key direction of mine. And data literacy, which I'll have a lot more to say about later, is something I'm betting my business on very heavily. So I think that just about everybody is going to be, to some extent, a data analytics professional, which is to say a decision support professional, assisting in, I guess, a value chain of human decision making that sits on top of whatever computers can do, and whatever automated processes there are that, well, not entirely automated, but increasingly automated, increasingly manual processes that actually execute. So I'm expecting a future where decision making is king and execution is devolved as a menial thing, and I'm expecting a future where everybody is going to be data literate. That's a future. That's not now. So I'm betting on a data literacy revolution. And let me talk about the data literacy revolution and put it into context. If data analytics was like IT, and I'm using IT as an analogy, and analogies are never perfect, but I think it's a pretty good one. I would argue that in terms of volume, sheer volume, everybody knows how we measure information. There's Shannon information in bits. We can measure information in amounts. So if we measure just the sheer amount of information, not the qualitative kind of information, but the sheer amount, I would argue that an IT professional, what they called a programmer, what they now call a developer, in 1985, I would say that a typical programmer in 1985 has at least the same order of magnitude and possibly less IT knowledge than your average 12-year-old now. I'm not saying it's the same knowledge, but I'm saying in terms of information volume, I'd say your average 12-year-old and everybody here has this non-trivial amount of IT knowledge. If someone in 1985 saw one of you do your work, they'd say, you're a computer person. You're an IT person, because you're doing all this magical stuff. And there was a transitional period in the early 90s where you could get away with that. You could just, look at me, I can use a web browser. Wow, you must be a real, yeah. Seriously, there was that phase. So I would say that there has been, over the last 30 years, a computer literacy revolution, an absolute revolution in computer literacy. There's this non-trivial amount of knowledge that we all have, and we all must have, not just to be high-end professionals, but just to be functional members of the middle class. And I think most tellingly, about 10 years ago, you still hear stories of high-level senior executives who quite famously couldn't use their emails or couldn't use a browser. That does not happen anymore. That's like having an illiterate, literally illiterate executive. That's impossible. You can't be illiterate and be a white-collar professional. You can't be computer illiterate and be a white-collar professional. So here's my claim. There is a stack of knowledge that the average member of the middle class, and indeed the average manager, should have and currently doesn't for the most part. Has in certain places. And I think that revolution is coming, the revolution where we will have a management class and indeed a white-collar class that knows what a probability distribution is and doesn't see it as an esoteric idea, realizes that you can't think about the future and can't think about risk if all you have is arithmetic and you don't have probability distributions. They know what logic is. They know what science is and what experiments are. They can do trivial, at least, things with at least Microsoft Excel. There's the ability to roll up data, slice and dice, lookups, stuff I never do. I never use Excel. But I think being completely removed from data and more to the point, completely removed from logical reasoning and quantitative reasoning is going to be something that it's going to be a luxury that the middle class will no longer be able to afford. That's the future I'm betting on, and I'm seeing transformation in that direction slowly. Because currently, we're in an environment where you have a temporary anomaly. We have a temporary anomaly where in some areas like hedge funds, sports betting funds in particular, political parties, armies at war, anywhere where outcomes matter and outcomes are ambiguous and decisions really are life or death, you see a very different culture, and you see a very data literate culture all the way down. Whereas in most places, especially in the corporates, that's not the case at all. Part of the reason, I think, is that we're too damn rich. This whole data revolution has happened at a time when we've been extremely lucky economically, especially in Australia. So when do good decisions matter? When times are tough. have tough times overlapped with a period of having good analytics technology on hand? No, not yet, not in Australia. So I think scarcity will drive Darwinism, which will accelerate this data literacy revolution. Whereas the current environment, I think, is immature and broken. I think we have a management class, and indeed we have a whole corporate culture and an analytics industry that's geared around a completely anomalous situation. One analogy I have is we have, every corporate I see out there, maybe with some exceptions, is like a fish tank full of very, very expensive tropical fish and no water. The expensive tropical fish are the data scientists. The water is the data literacy of the organization. It's an ecosystem that makes use of the data scientists, that understands what the data scientists are there for. So this is where I pull out an analogy of mine, because I think analogies help at this point, where I think if this was what's happening with the data revolution, I think is very analogous to, say, the printing revolution in the 1400s. But I don't know whether historically this happened or not. But imagine if everybody got into printing. Hey, printing's really cool. Let's get into printing. And you had a chief paper officer responsible for paper, and they have meetings where they talk about paper and paper types, and they have conferences where they talk about the different kinds of printing press, and they brag about how quickly it can print or how many letters per page, and look at this font, look at that font, and none of these people can read. Okay, it's kind of known that there's this technical, unpleasant skill called reading, and it's hard, and everybody wants the fast track to get into paper and printing, but the whole reading thing, who cares? And you have publishing companies where, yeah, like I said, everybody from the top down is illiterate, and there are these people called writers sitting around. Oh, and everyone wants apps where you have a printing app where that involves someone at the reading end to actually read this stuff. But the point is, the app is only useful and relevant as long as no one in the company actually has to learn to read. Okay, this is where I see data science in most corporates today. And I'm seeing tulip mania. I'm saying, why are you investing so heavily in data science? That's my view. I can't understand, honestly, why so many telcos and banks and insurance companies are investing so heavily in data science when there isn't the ecosystem to make use of it. It's a cargo cult at the moment. I don't think it's going to be like that forever, but I'm seeing largely a cargo cult. So it's an immature and currently broken environment, but with some amazing opportunities for the future. And yeah, I don't want to say it's all like this. I think I'm using hyperbole a bit. It's mostly like this, and it's mostly broken, but the good guys are winning. It's mostly broken, but there are, as I said, islands of incredible sanity, and I think the islands of sanity are growing, and those islands of sanity are infecting the large corporates as well. So that was me setting the scene. Now, let's talk about you folks. Let's talk about actuaries. Let's talk about how actuaries fit into this scene. Well, I think mostly you folks have an enormous amount of value. The value you have is that you've done the hard yards. You've actually had the training in the one thing that I think matters the most. So the equivalent of reading in the context of my printing analogy is another thing that nobody ever thinks is that important in data analytics, which is actually the most important thing, which is statistics. You folks have training in statistics, and you have training in statistics in a business context. So you have domain knowledge, and you have training in the language that data speaks. And your training actually makes you incredibly humble, perhaps too humble, because you know what you don't know. You know how to look at things carefully. You're taught to be careful. You're taught to be risk managers. So all this amazing training actually makes you, if anything, I think, too humble compared to people I meet every day in the data science side of things. So I think in terms of groundwork, when I met someone yesterday, so I was talking to someone yesterday at a data science event where Bassem actually presented, and this person said to me, hey, I want to transition into data science, and I've got software engineering. And I'm thinking, That's like, I want to transition into nuclear physics and I'm good with a monkey wrench. Look, I don't want to downplay software engineering. Software engineering, but it's a doing skill. It's not a relevant, it's not the most relevant skill. So I said, look, that's largely irrelevant. And then this person said, but I also have a master's in actuarial. I'm going, why didn't you tell me that first? But seriously, there's this perception that data science is some sort of IT activity. Well, that's like, well, you know, accountants use spreadsheets, and in 1985, people would think they're IT professionals if they were caught using spreadsheets, right? Look, data science is no more an IT activity than what you folks do. And you guys have the important skills, the skills that take years to acquire and can only be acquired by a minority. You need raw IQ. You need personality characteristics like conscientiousness and drive. You need to be able to think carefully and think logically to acquire skills in statistics. And statistics is an unknown unknown. If you've studied it, you know how important it is and how difficult it is. If you haven't studied it, you're going, well, this data science thing must just be about learning a language like R, which you can learn R in 2 days. I run a course in that. R is fantastic, by the way, and you should learn it, and that, as that presentation showed. But R is not the most important thing. The stats is the most important thing, and indeed the domain knowledge that you get around the stats. You guys have that in spades. It's amazing. So that's an important point. The stuff that you guys don't have, the stuff that you need, and I'll talk about the stuff that you need, that can be picked up in weeks or months. And I think a lot of people who want to get into data science, who don't have your background, have it completely backwards. They say, how do I get into data science? And they expect me to say, do one of my courses. And I'm not going to lie to them. I'm not going to say, do one of my expensive 2-day courses and you'll be a data scientist. Hell no, that's unethical. I'm not going to tell them that. What I say to them is go and do a master's of stats, or go and do a master's of econometrics. So you have the important stuff in abundance. You actually have, many of you, a lot of the higher level data science skills. You actually even have machine learning. So everybody here has learned about generalized linear models, right? Congratulations, or as they say in my culture, mazel tov, you now have machine learning. You don't realize what machine learning is. Machine learning is a brand. Machine learning is a brand which includes a whole lot of stuff that's in the traditional statistical toolkit. And when I say you have machine learning, generalized linear models aren't just machine learning. They're an incredibly important, ubiquitously used bit of machine learning. That's the good news. The bad news is you're going to need to relearn it completely. You're going to need to learn the statistical learning, machine learning way of doing it and the Bayesian way of doing it, maybe, rather than the classical statistical way of doing it. But you're much further along than you think. And I mentioned that you're all domain experts, at least in finance, insurance, risk, which is great. That's a good starting point. And finally, something that is very, very important is that you have training in a broader business social context. You have training in the legal implications of what you're doing. You have training in the ethical aspects of what you're doing. I can tell you now that those are becoming more and more important in the data space. So this is all the good. So I would think that if an individual actuary woke up one day and said, I want to be a data scientist, I'd say your humility is probably your biggest enemy, because that's going to make you think that you're not ready for it and the barriers to entry are too high, and that's all rubbish. What you do need to do is find a good mentor. You need to network well, find a good mentor, and find someone who can let you keep your wonderful humility, because it's a really good thing. It's good to be arrogant as a marketing exercise. It's very bad to drink your own Kool-Aid. It's important. Staying humble on the inside about your own abilities is very important. It's a way of being careful. It's a way of learning. It's a way of, it helps you change more rapidly. But having a coach to be arrogant for you and to remind you that you actually are quite amazing is very important as well. So I think the first thing a lot of actuaries who want to transition need is a good buddy mentor in the data analytics space. I'll talk about a few other things you can do if you want to transition more into data analytics. But these are this is the good news. I'll now talk about the challenges that you would face. And now I want to mention another thing which I think is less helpful. And it's probably less true of the younger actuaries than perhaps some of the older ones, but you've probably heard the word entrepreneurial thrown around a lot. And it's not true to say that you guys aren't, but it's true to say that some of you guys aren't. It's true to say that some, or I think what's fairer to say is that a lot of actuarial roles are not exactly entrepreneurial. And remember how I said that data science, data analytics exists for only one thing, and that is to support decision making? Well, I would argue that, at least for some of you, your job is actually not data analytics at all, because your job is not decision support, at least not decision support for the organization you work for. Because if you're in a statutory role, it may be that you're in a statutory role and the CEO is really happy you're there and you're providing very good advice and you're being a decision supporter as well. But it may also be that you're in a purely statutory role. I think you'll agree that it's possible, right? It's possible. Some statutory roles, well, they're statutory, but you're still valued. Some statutory roles are purely statutory roles. And what does that mean? That means that if the law changed tomorrow, you'd be fired. That, you know, the only reason you're there is because that company needs to tick a box. You're there to manage a risk, and the risk is a regulator not being happy, which is not the same as actually managing an actual business risk, and certainly isn't supporting any decision in the business. So when you make a career, if you're the sort of person who makes a career out of ticking boxes and actually being there because a law requires you to be there, rather than adding value to the decisions that organization makes, well, I don't think you're doing decision support, and you may have some difficulty breaking into a much more competitive, much less protected environment, which is data analytics at large. So I would ask, how are you folks doing in various industries? Now, I see people with actuarial qualifications all the way to fellow who've just basically thrown it all in and become data scientists. They're out there. So when an actuary wants to become a data scientist, they become pretty damn good ones. I've seen it. You're out there. But at the same time, I'm not seeing a hell of a lot of these. I'm not seeing a lot of qualified actuaries or indeed people of actuarial background in the startups. I'm seeing an increasing number outside of finance. But again, once you're outside of finance, once you're in a startup, level playing field. No one cares that you've got the associate or the fellow. No one cares. It's all about the value that you can deliver. There's no statutory role for you. So what you want to be, I would suggest, to future-proof yourself, is key decision support staff, and be ready to compete with non-accredited people, and non-accredited people who'll walk out of I don't know, a 3-day course in basic programming one day and suddenly have a go at getting a job where the job title is data scientist. I'm not saying they will get the job, but I'm not saying they necessarily won't either. I've seen some horrible things. Also, bear in mind that there is back to the changes I was talking about, the literacy changes, there are changes in the nature of the executive and the executive's priorities. So the executives that we had yesterday and the executives we have now are not the executives that I think we'll have in the future. And I think that I'll make more of a point about that when I talk about challenges to the profession. But in my conversation with Bassem, he asked me to address certain truisms about what sets an actuary apart in the current analytics environment. And I'll make that point, which I thought was a important and fun point to make, which is, you could say, well, you have a certificate which shows that you're very capable and very clever, because you do. You actually do. So you have a piece of paper that says, I'm a very capable and clever data analytics professional. You have that. Now, the argument is that that's great, because now you can go and you can say, well, I have this, and the person who did the 2-day course in computer programming does not have this capability. That's true. That's true. That does set you apart. But who does it set you apart to? You see, if you're trying to get a job with me, I'm going to look past your certificate. I don't care whether you have a certificate or not. I'm going to want to see what it is that you actually do and who it is that you actually are, and I'll be able to compare you to 2-day course person, right? But the sort of person who will hire you is the sort of person who wouldn't know how to assess you without those certificates in place, right? The whole idea of certification is so someone who is not qualified to assess you can assess you, yeah? So here's the issue. They're not qualified to assess you. Should they be managing you? So if someone isn't qualified to distinguish you from a two-day programming course person for a data science job, should they be instructing you in what you should do as a data scientist? Can they assess you in the data science work that you do? And here's my view. Overwhelmingly, the answer is no, and it ain't stopping them. And overwhelmingly, I've just described to you the situation out there. So if we're going to talk about certification, I don't want to see data analytics people certified. I'm actually against certification. I'll talk about that in a second. But when I say against, it's like, it doesn't matter what I think, because I'm not an activist against it. I just think it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to work, and I'll explain why in a second. But here's the thing. I'm almost all for the managers being certified to manage data scientists. Just about everybody I see out there complaining about how there are no standards for data scientists, I go, actually, the people who need standards is you. The people who need standards are the people who are spending tremendous amounts of money on paying for data science salaries so they can have a pet data scientist in their menagerie, while giving them no data, no political support, no tasks to do, nothing, and leading to the very high churn in the data science industry. I don't know if you've heard about the churn. It's churning like crazy. Lots of people talk about it. No one talks about what I've just told you, which is you've got data scientists who are not happy being treated as pets by people who have no business managing them, who actually don't care. They actually hire them as status symbols rather than as valuable assets. And I give a presentation where the question is to ask your prospective employer, where my advice is, get a job where you're an asset, don't get a job where you're a status symbol, a pet. Doesn't happen so much to actuary folks, but it happens to a lot of data scientists. So like I said, good news and a few challenges for actuaries. Let's talk about the profession itself. And I think professions as a whole are facing massive challenge. How am I going for time, by the way? I think professions as a whole are facing massive challenges. Look, we're talking about change that happens over months. Do the standards, the practices of your profession change over months? We're also talking about incredible heterogeneity. Now, I know there is a difference between a life actuary and a general insurance actuary and what people do in superannuation, and there are actuaries who work in the treasury functions of banks who do something different again. I realize this, but that's far less heterogeneity than you get across people who might call themselves data analytics professionals or even data scientists. So the heterogeneity and the sheer flexibility means that there's a bit of a challenge if what you want is to maintain a set of practices, a set of standards, and review them occasionally the way most professions do. I also think that whole new areas of activity, whole new toolkits, whole new applications, whole new industries rise and fall so rapidly in this space that I think the traditional professional model is going to have a bit of a challenge keeping up. So, like I said, I think on the whole, this data analytics thing is terrific news for actuaries, but more of a challenge for the profession as a whole. Another side of the challenge is just the nature of the activity, because I actually think that to the extent that you are working, I guess, in a statutory sort of role and not as trusted advisors, you've got things like automation working against you. Far less so than I think the accounting profession. I think they're facing a much more immediate threat in this regard. But I think this is true of all professions. This is true of law. This is true of medicine. This is the professional model. And thank you. The professional model, this idea that there is a job and the job is well defined and you're doing, well, one of a fixed number of things every day, that's under threat. So I now want to move on to the whole issue of, well, what does it mean to get into data science? And there's the activity and then there's the community. So first of all, I would welcome you all to come and join Data Science Sydney and come along and see our presentations and our other events, and like Bassem and Anthony Tockhard, that I'm sure many of you know, come and present to us. So by all means, network with us. if you want to be a good data scientist, you're going to want a mentor. You've learned a lot of stats, but competitive field, right? Every bit of knowledge matters. Stats, stats, stats. That's the hard stuff. Learn more of it. Learn more stats, learn more econometrics. That doesn't mean don't learn the obvious stuff. By all means, learn R, learn Python, learn machine learning. Do online courses. That stuff you can learn reasonably quickly. Hey, do my courses, seriously. I can give you a serious reason for doing my courses, but you know, frivolously, well, there's my courses, there's online courses. Teach yourselves, learn on your own. I'm sure you can do it. Being a self-learner and a self-starter is an important thing in this area as well. But networking and having a mentor, those things are important too. And the other thing is, if you really want to break into the industry and you really want to develop experience and ability, have a go. The website Kaggle.com, which runs machine learning competitions, is a terrific way to develop and sharpen up your skills in machine learning. And also have passion projects, have your passions, and blog about them, video about them. What I just saw was amazing. You should all be doing this. So yeah, get a mentor, do lots of stats, come to Data Science Sydney and do all of my courses. That's probably it. And I guess we have some time for questions.
So thanks, that was fantastic. Obviously, I think very energizing for our audience. So I'd like to throw it open to questions. I've certainly got some while people are waiting, but I'm sure people have some good questions from the audience. Great, fantastic. If you can just introduce yourself, say where you work.
Sorry, I won't stand up because I've got my laptop on my lap. Eugene, good to see you again. I think I last time met you, I was at Caltex. I'm Sue Kong from KPMG. So really good advice in terms of learning some of the skill sets and then the source to learn it. And good to know that we already know machine learning. Because when I first talk about GRM with my data scientists when I was in Caltex, I was like, what's that? So it's good. I would like to ask specific questions. Like if you have like 15, 20 years of experience, what type of training, what kind of learning that you would recommend us to do to upskill if we want to continue to develop to become a leader in analytics?
Well, I have to say, whatever you do, it has to be my courses. By the way, really good to see you again, Sue. It really depends on what you want to do. And it really depends on where you want to be at a certain point in time. I think knowing your skill set, I think sort of the basic machine learning and the standard languages. I mean, you use R already, don't you? Yeah. So I would say in your case, the sort of the more theoretical side of the machine learning algorithms, and more breadth, not just depth, not just hey, let's build more predictive models, but there's more to life than predictive modeling, and there's more to statistics than machine learning. Machine learning is a bunch of computer scientists who got very excited about solving a very narrow set of problems. There is a much wider set of problems, and what's going to make you flexible, elite, useful is being across those models. And by the way, econometrics. If you want to study one killer app, I think the thing that's going to set people apart in the future is econometrics and causal impact analysis.
Some good tips. Everybody's writing that one down. Any other questions? Right at the back.
Thanks. Just wondering, early on you said that you believe data science is in a transitional period and still immature. I'm wondering, are you referring to the Australian scene or globally? And how do you think the Australian capacity compares to, say, Silicon Valley?
Okay, I think it's global. I think Australia's worse. If we're talking about Silicon Valley, I think Silicon Valley is different. The tech scene, the startup scene, tech scene is different. They're more mature. So any organization that can fall on its face and die if it doesn't make the right moves is going to have very different incentives than most corporates and most government agencies. So if you want to get broader experience with people who are primarily motivated by outcomes rather than politics, I'd go into the tech scene. And yeah, Silicon Valley is probably better than startups here, but there are some pretty cool ones here as well.
Any other questions? Oh, great. Nicolette, please.
So just more of a fun one. So given your comments on singularity, what do you think of the Elon Musk quote,
That we're a simulation.
the view that we're all living in a virtual reality world already?
Okay, on a personal note, I was exploring that idea about 10 years ago, and I found it unbearably horrifying.
So you ignored it.
I tried to ignore it. I actually, it's not a fun idea. I don't know. Some people think it's fun. I don't think it's a fun idea. It's not a fun idea because it's plausible, and its implications are not fun either.
Very good.
For your mental health, don't think about it. Is seriously my advice.
Hi, Eugene. Thanks for this amazing presentation. My question to you is regarding data exchange. So now, one of the issues that we have in the insurance industry is regulation. So because of that, whatever initiative we have regarding data science, which definitely will involve some data, but then different parties don't agree, so then all these initiatives just, vanish. So what are your thoughts with regard to that?
Okay, there are two ways to answer this problem. One is to give you a sort of the answer I would give as a consultant, which is let's take the situation as it is, and there are strategies, and it gets very, very much into the specifics. Very common problem, and it's one of many common problems. But here's the thing. It's a problem that shouldn't exist. It's a problem that only exists when there isn't the executive will to solve this problem. I mean, what it tells me, this problem is a side effect of data analytics not being important enough to sort out. If you were a country at war and being crushed by your enemies, you would solve this problem in 5 seconds. If you're a hedge fund, you would solve this problem in 5 seconds. But this is important. This and many other problems that I come across, organizational problems to do with the logistics, political positioning, command and control of data science, comes down to what are the incentives of the people at the very top. And usually what you find is that actual decision making is very, very low on the agenda. At best they're curious about data science. I'm not saying it's like that for you, but this is my guess of any question of this kind. If the will was there, this problem would be solved. These people would be told, do this or you're fired. It wouldn't be a negotiation. Most negotiations should be negotiations. Most negotiations really should be command and control solutions. Sorry. Yes.
Daniel Stone from TEL.
Hi, Daniel.
That led me to my question I was thinking of asking. The Chief Analytics Officer, and I differentiate that from a Chief Data Officer and a Chief Information Officer. What kind of people do you think actuaries would suit that role quite well? I personally do. Do you see that role existing in insurance companies in the future, and I guess in companies more broadly? Because that seems like it would answer the question you've just mentioned.
So one thing I'd like to do is to reframe where analytics sits. First of all, you mentioned that the Chief Data Officer is separate from the Chief Analytics Officer. Publishing analogy. So there's a Chief Publishing Officer and there's a Chief Paper Officer. Why is there a Chief Paper Officer and what exactly is their job? Serious, important question. I ask this of a number of Chief Data Officers that I come across. But as for the Chief Analytics Officer, I see analytics. People ask me, where should analytics sit in the business? And my answer is, well, not IT. And they go, you've told us where it shouldn't be. Tell us where it should be. And I said, well, the first thing is not to put it in a bad place. Secondly, the good place doesn't exist in most businesses because the good place is intelligence in the James Bond sense. Most intelligence is there not to do projects, not to do business as usual. Intelligence is there to keep your eyes open and to support decision making. Most businesses don't do this because they don't really value decision making. But here's the other thing. Your Chief Intelligence Officer, if we look at recent track record of certain large countries, is next in line for CEO. So to answer your question, I would think that any organization that's facing a life or death situation needs good decision support. And whoever can provide good decision support is probably someone who can make good decisions too. That's the thought. Whether that's an actuary or not, I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I don't know. It depends on the actuary.
I'd also like to encourage people in webinar to obviously send through your questions. We've got a lot of people on webinar today as well. Any more from the floor? I'm trying to get in a question. I'll go for mine. Well, I guess who are the influential leaders in data analytics in Australia, the inspiring people who you think are making good progress?
She still has to ask.
Just oh, sorry, not the question. Not
just kidding, just kidding.
Yeah, companies, I guess, I mean, or more, yeah.
Okay. Well, again, sorry to give you a long-winded, non-trivial answer.
Of course.
It depends how you measure it. And unfortunately, most people would say the answer is obvious. We know who the big names are, and we know who's making the most noise, hiring the most data scientists, spending the most money on it, going to conferences and talking about how clever they are and so forth. I'm not going to talk about those.
No.
Okay. The ones who are really at the forefront of analytics, I can't talk about either. You know why? It's the intelligence thing. Yeah. When it really is a strategic value add, you shut up about it. Okay, I can think of one, I'm guessing is an analytics leader. I'm guessing ASIO is an analytics leader. Yeah. I'm also guessing, I'm guessing because we don't know a damn thing about what they're doing, but you sure as hell hope they're an analytics leader, right? But apart from ASIO, there's any number of hedge funds, sports betting funds, political parties. Yeah. And for them, it's do or die stuff. What I do know is that I come across people who work for these, and those people are amazing. And they have to sign things that say, sometimes they can't even say who they're working for. So the leaders are well under the radar.
Yeah, okay, great. So one of the other questions I'd have is, I guess you talk about data analytics should really be all about aiding decisions. And so I guess one of my questions is do you have these chief analytic officers being the people who actually go, hey, I can find value here, or I think this is the question to ask? Or are we still in a situation where you have we're waiting on the other executives to go, hey, this is the question I need answered?
It's B. We're waiting for the decision literacy and data literacy of the executive to go above a critical level. We're not there yet.
And we don't have the commercial acumen of the data scientists to just be able to free flow some questions, do you think?
Okay, that goes beyond commercial acumen. That is interpersonal manipulation, which is beyond that of most gifted sociopaths. I don't think you can nudge someone several levels above you into looking at the world in a way that they're frankly not empowered, not equipped to do. But there's another aspect. There's an incentive aspect. I think that while that level of management may not be very capable when it comes to data literacy, they're very aware of their incapability, and they're very aware of how relatively unimportant they will be in a world where that capability matters. So when you throw that incentive aspect into the mix, I think myth of bottom-up influence is it's not something that leads to a happy ending.
Okay.
I think change happens top down or not at all.
Okay. Other questions? Bassam, thank you.
Thanks, Eugene. That was amazing. I know we spoke about this, prior to the seminar, but I want to get your thoughts on, you mentioned our professions have a challenge. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what professions maybe should be thinking about doing in order to thrive in this future you've described.
Disbanding? I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to think. It's like, well, it's a heck of a pivot, right? I mean, it'd be a radical pivot. It'd be a radical pivot. So I guess it's a bit of a challenge, like, the union movement has a challenge. They're trying to completely redefine their role because they're just losing members. The good news is this is not something that's going to happen next year or even in 5 years. We're talking about, the 20 to 30 year time frame here. So I don't know. It's an open question. But the real question, the first thing you do is you ask, what are we here for? What are our core values? Because if you're going to change, you compromise relatively unimportant things to protect the most important ones. So the question is for you, well, why is there an Institute of Actuaries? What are you here for?
feel I need to respond to this. So one of the things I would say is that is good about a profession is, of course, an appreciation of good learning. And
Sorry,
so that's in terms of the, no, but I think
I
it's a good
wasn't
open.
challenging.
Yeah,
No, I wasn't saying tell society what you're good for. I mean, tell yourselves.
Yeah.
Tell what are you
Yeah.
protecting? What do you want to keep?
Yeah.
So in your own interest, what do you want to keep?
And I think it's really important that, and it's one thing the Data Analytics Working Group is looking at, what exactly is our actuarial value proposition. But I think part of it is this, hopefully, deep learning. As you say, we've got good aptitude, we've got good skills, we can improve them certainly. But also I think, and leading maybe to the next question, is this idea of professionalism, ethics, actually taking care and stuff rather than an appreciation of acumen. I'm not saying others don't have that, but it's certainly one thing that we would value in our profession, kind of continuing learning. On the notion of ethics and professionalism with regards to data analytics, I guess, are you seeing a big change in the market following a lot of the scandals that have come out more recently with the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, in terms of employers, how they view it? Are they asking more questions?
Look, just like there's a lot of data science being hired, there's a lot of data science being bought. There's a lot of data science possibly even being done, but there's not much data science actually delivering value. Similarly with ethics. Ethics is very topical. Ethics is very trendy. Ethics is very easy to get into. You don't need a stats degree to suddenly get into the ethics of data science, and people are. And companies are hiring ethics people. Do they care about ethics, or is it just a topical thing? I don't know. But my question before wasn't, hey, what's your value proposition? That wasn't my question.
Yeah, okay.
My question was, you as a group of people, what do you want to keep? You're going to have to change.
Yeah.
And change is about sacrificing certain things you value in order to keep certain things that you must value. So like, a family never wants to break apart, but they might relocate. So what do you as a family want to hold on to? Because that's really, to answer Bassem's question. I wasn't at no point was I demanding to know what your value is to society. I know what your value, you have value.
That's good.
I don't want you to think that was my question.
No. 1 minute, one last
Right.
question. Anything? Our convener of our Data Analytics Work Group, Bartosz.
Thanks, Eugene. I mean, this has been brilliant. I think definitely something that we looked for when we were organizing this seminar. And I think a lot of sort of thought-provoking conversations, which is great. So I think, my sort of view of, as I've been sort of watching different organizations, is, that whole transformation, going from the old into the new, and not necessarily knowing what the new even looks like, right? So, for leaders, who are sort of looking at that sort of transformation, from the old to the new, and I think that'll be a good sort of introduction in the next sort of session, right? What is your sort of, I guess, one, key, I guess, observations, advice, or guidance, some sort of snippet that you could give us?
Okay, I'd look at whoever commissioned the transformation. And I'd look at to what extent they're a supporter and to what extent they're a beneficiary. So more typically, when I hear CEOs go on about, I am a big supporter of an evidence-driven culture, I want to see us transform into an analytics culture, and I say to them, what data have you looked at yesterday? I'm not saying they need to be using R and doing machine learning, but it's like, are they a recipient of decision support? Very often the answer is no, they have nothing to do with it whatsoever. So I think the most important aspect at the leadership level of a transformation is that you have an engaged senior executive, that they're actually if they want to buy a 5-star restaurant, they're actually eating in the restaurant. It's not that they're expecting everyone else to eat, but they see their job as somehow higher than that. What is their job? By the way, if their job is not to make decisions from decision support, what the heck is their job? Open question.
Thank you so much. Look, I think you've left us loads of ideas to think about. Thanks for your thought-provoking ideas, not just on data analytics, but also for our profession. So Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank
and
you
please,
all.
everybody, go to his meetups. Let's have more actuaries there. Thanks. And handing over now to Basin Morris to chair our next session. Thank you.